Why did her hand stop shaking the exact second the tray hit the floor? The crash echoed through the bar like a warning shot. Bottles shattered. Beer bled across polished wood. Laughter rose before the silence had time to settle, and Rachel Torres dropped to her knees. Not because she was weak, because she was trained to lower her profile. She whispered apologies no one cared to hear. Her cheeks burned. Her ears rang. The room smelled like alcohol and adrenaline and old pride. 6 men in uniform stood over her like she was a joke that hadn't landed yet. She kept her head down. That was the part that saved lives. Her breathing stayed slow, controlled, 4 in, 4 out. Her fingers moved automatically, picking glass, cataloging distances, exits, obstacles. No one noticed. They were too busy watching her be humiliated. She let them, because there were rules, and because there was something she hadn't told them yet. They mocked her voice, her size, her presence, her existence. Someone poured beer over her hair. It soaked her collar, slid down her spine, cold and sticky and humiliating. She didn't flinch. Inside, something older than fear stirred awake. The scar on her wrist showed when one of them grabbed her arm, a small circular mark most people would miss, but a trained eye would recognize it immediately. A bullet wound. Her phone vibrated once in her pocket. She didn't look. Not yet. Why did the room suddenly feel like it was holding its breath? The lights flickered. Not dramatically, just enough to feel wrong. Every phone screen lit up at once. A single message appeared. Classified, eyes only. Rachel finally raised her head. The room changed when her eyes did. They were no longer soft, no longer uncertain, no longer apologetic. They were measuring, calculating, ready. Laser dots painted one man's forehead in perfect geometry. Someone whispered. Someone swore. Someone stepped back. A voice filled the room, calm, mechanical, absolute. Identity confirmed. Threat level extinction. Rachel didn't move. She just said one word. No. It landed heavier than any punch. The men who had been laughing were suddenly very aware of their pulse, their breathing, their mistakes. She adjusted her soaked shirt slowly, like nothing mattered less. Because nothing here did. Who was she really? When the doors opened, everything made sense. Not in a comforting way. In a terrifying one. 3 men entered first, civilian clothes, military movement, then a 4th. He didn't rush, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't threaten. He simply recognized her. Ghost 7. The word rippled through the room like a forgotten prayer. Rachel looked smaller than ever standing there soaked in beer, and somehow more dangerous than anything the room had ever held. They said her name like it was a storm. They spoke of missions erased from history, of children pulled from burning cities, of operations that had no paperwork because paperwork meant vulnerability. Rachel listened quietly. Then she said softly, "I just wanted to be normal." Her voice cracked on that word. Normal. What happens when the weapon remembers she is human? Her creator was still alive. That was the message. And he had taken a boy she once saved. A boy who believed she was a ghost that couldn't die. Rachel's hands trembled, not from fear. From memory. She closed her eyes once. Then she stood up. Not as Ghost 7. As Rachel Torres. The woman who had chosen to live. The woman who had chosen to feel. The woman who would choose again. Why did she walk into hell without looking back? The tomb was still there. Buried. Hidden. Waiting. She didn't sneak in. She walked straight through the front gate. Her voice carried through the ruins. I'm here. The children were inside. So was her past. So was the man who made her what she had been. She moved through corridors she knew better than her own childhood home, found children trembling in rooms built to erase them. She didn't promise safety. She promised choice. And they followed, because something about her eyes told them she had survived what they were afraid of. And she wouldn't let them become what she had been forced to be. What does a ghost do when she finally learns to live? The tomb burned behind them. The children were free. The man who built hell was finally just a man in restraints. And Rachel stood watching the sunrise from a helicopter window. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She was breathing. Later she went back to the bar, picked up a tray, served drinks, smiled at strangers, lived quietly, because sometimes the bravest thing a weapon can do is choose to be ordinary. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the laughter fade the instant her phone vibrated? It wasn't loud. It didn't chime. It didn't even light up brightly. Just a subtle tremor against her hip, something most people would never notice. Rachel noticed. Her fingers paused against the wet napkins in her hand. Beer still dripped from her hair. A thin red line traced her lip where the ring had cut her skin. She tasted copper and hops and humiliation all at once. Around her, the room still laughed. Someone clapped, someone whistled, someone muttered something about girls like her. Someone raised a phone a little higher to get a better angle. But the laughter no longer reached her ears, because inside her chest, a different rhythm had started. A counting rhythm. Not fear. Not panic. Timing. She inhaled slowly, 4 seconds. Held it 4 seconds. Exhaled 4 seconds. The room was no longer a bar. It was a space with 12 exits, 3 blind corners, 14 potential improvised weapons, 8 surfaces that could deflect a bullet. Her mind slipped into the old shape, the one she had promised herself she would never wear again. A man stepped closer and kicked the broken tray farther away. Glass scraped across the floor. He laughed. "Look at her crawling," he said, "like she belongs there." The words landed where words always landed, against a place in her that had been scarred long before him. Not by insults, by commands. Stand. Kneel. Hold. Don't cry. Her breathing never changed. Someone crouched in front of her, breath thick with alcohol. He told her she was soft, that she would die first in any real survival situation, that people like her were the reason others didn't make it home. Her hand tightened around a napkin. Not to clean, to ground herself. She didn't speak. She had learned early that silence was safer than honesty. A hand grabbed her wrist and yanked her upright. For a split second, the world tilted, not because she was weak, but because her body had been trained to go limp when lifted. It made throws easier, falls safer, injuries smaller. But this wasn't training. This was a man who thought he could own her gravity. That was when he saw the scar. A tiny pale circle on the inside of her wrist. The kind that doesn't come from accidents. His grip loosened. His eyes narrowed. Rachel felt the shift before he spoke. But he never got the chance. Cold liquid crashed over her head. Beer poured down her face, her neck, her back. Her shirt clung to her skin. Her hair came undone, strands sticking to her cheeks. The bar erupted again. Phones lit up like a stadium. She stood perfectly still. Not frozen. Anchored. Her eyes lifted not to the man pouring beer but past him, past his shoulder, past his friends. She wasn't looking at people. She was mapping space. Her phone vibrated again. This time longer. A confirmation pulse. Her thumb brushed her pocket. She didn't check the screen. She didn't need to. They were already watching. Someone mocked her for calling for help. Someone joked about who she might be calling. Someone said she probably didn't have anyone to call at all. She straightened. Not dramatically. Just enough. Her shoulders squared a fraction of an inch. Her feet shifted to the balls. A micro movement. But it was the kind that changes everything. When she finally spoke, it was only one word. No. Not loud. Not shaky. Not emotional. Just final. The room didn't understand it yet. They laughed again, but softer this time. Because something about her tone made their instincts itch. A woman stepped forward and slapped her. The sound cracked sharp through the room. Rachel let her head turn with the blow, rolled with it, reduced the force, kept her balance. Blood traced her lip. Her eyes came back level. Not angry. Not scared. Assessing. You don't say no to us, the woman hissed. Rachel blinked slowly. Things are already unpleasant, she said calmly. For you. They laughed again. But now it was thinner. A man lunged. A massive hand closed around her throat and lifted her off the floor. Her feet left the ground. Her airway narrowed. The bar gasped. Someone screamed. Her hands did not claw at him. They hung loosely at her sides. Because she knew something he didn't. Her body could survive 8 seconds without oxygen before the edges of vision blurred. 10 seconds before muscle control weakened. 14 before permanent damage began. He didn't know that. He leaned in close, face red, breath hot. You've got 10 seconds, he growled. Rachel looked into his eyes. Not defiant. Not pleading. Just steady. 10, she said. His grip tightened. 9. The room felt colder. 8. The lights flickered. Not theatrically. Just wrong. 7. Her lips curved slightly, not into a smile but into recognition. 6. Every phone in the bar lit up at once. The music skipped. The TVs flashed static. And a calm voice filled every speaker. Identity confirmed. Threat level extinction. 5 red laser dots painted his forehead. His grip loosened. His breath caught. 4. He dropped her. She landed lightly, knees soft, spine aligned. She didn't step back. She didn't step forward. She simply existed in the space he had just lost. Her shirt still dripped. Her lips still bled. But the room was no longer laughing. People were standing now. Some unconsciously. Some shaking. Some whispering. Rachel exhaled slowly. Not in relief. In return. Because the old world had just touched her again. And she was no longer sure she wanted to be invisible anymore. Not when silence was what allowed cruelty to grow. Not when being quiet meant letting the wrong people believe they were untouchable. Her phone vibrated one more time. She finally slid it out of her pocket. Just long enough to see the message. 3 words. Asset located, stand by. Rachel slipped the phone back. Lifted her chin. And for the first time that night, she stopped pretending to be small. Why did the room suddenly feel like it had crossed an invisible line it could never uncross? No one said anything. No one laughed. No one even breathed correctly anymore. The 5 red laser dots glowed on Miller's forehead like a constellation that didn't belong to the sky. They followed his smallest movements with mechanical patience. He raised a shaking hand toward his face, but the dots adjusted before his fingers could touch them, a quiet reminder that whatever had found him was faster than he was. Rachel stood exactly where she had landed. Beer dripped from her hair onto the floor, Blood slid slowly along the curve of her lip. Her gray shirt clung to her frame like a confession she hadn't planned to make. Her breathing remained steady. The room felt colder, not in temperature but in certainty. The calm voice returned through the speakers. Biometric verification complete. Someone whispered, "This is fake." But their voice trembled. Another voice tried to laugh. It cracked instead. Rachel tilted her head just slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. She raised her hand once, a subtle motion that would look meaningless to anyone else, and the laser dots vanished instantly. The silence afterward was heavier than the threat had been. People realized something in that moment. Not that she was dangerous, but that she was controlled danger. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that doesn't rush. The kind that waits. A man in faded jeans stood slowly from a dark corner booth. He hadn't drawn attention to himself before. He hadn't raised his phone. He hadn't reacted when the beer was poured over her head. But now he straightened like someone, remembering who he had been. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Go 7," he said. The room flinched. Rachel closed her eyes for half a second. Not in fear. In tired recognition. "I was hoping you wouldn't know," she said softly. Several people turned sharply toward the man. He removed his baseball cap and placed it on the table in front of him. He stood with the rigid discipline of someone who had not forgotten how to stand for something bigger than himself. "You were declared dead," he continued. "That was the point." A ripple of murmurs spread through the bar like nervous static. "Dead people don't bleed," someone muttered. Rachel glanced down at her lip. "Then back up." "Dead people don't feel," she replied. Her voice wasn't bitter. It was factual. 3 more figures rose quietly from different corners of the room. Their clothes were civilian. Their posture was not. They didn't approach her. They didn't surround her. They placed themselves subtly, strategically, in positions that created invisible lines of coverage. Protection. Containment. Recognition. The man in faded jeans spoke again. "Aleppo," he said. 23 minutes, school district. You carried 2 children through open fire." Rachel swallowed. Her jaw tightened for the first time that night. That was supposed to stay buried. "My daughter was one of them," he said. And something finally cracked. Not loudly. Just enough. Rachel's shoulders dropped a fraction. "I told her you were brave," he added. "She told me you were kind." Rachel's eyes shimmered. She blinked once. "Kind." The word landed heavier than any metal ever had. Another voice joined. "Damascus Embassy," someone else said. 200 children, night evacuation. "Beirut schoolyard," another whispered. "Mumbai hotel." Names layered in the air. Lives. Places that had burned and been stitched back together quietly in the dark. Rachel looked around the room. Not at the frightened civilians. Not at the shaken men who had mocked her. But at the invisible trail of lives she had never stayed long enough to remember. "I was a tool," she said quietly. "I wasn't supposed to leave echoes." A tall man stepped through the entrance. He didn't hurry. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. His presence pulled the room into alignment. He looked at Rachel. Not with awe. Not with fear. With certainty. "Are you injured?" "No, sir." The way she said it made the room realize that waitress had never been the truth. Only the cover. Only the quiet she had chosen. The man turned to the shaken seals. "You assaulted a protected asset," he said calmly. "Do you understand what that means?" Miller opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. She's just. Don't, the man cut in. Do not reduce what you don't understand. Rachel finally moved. One step. Not toward them. Away. She bent down, picked up a piece of glass, set it on the tray. Her hands were steady. I didn't want this, she said. I wanted a job where the worst thing that could happen was spilled drinks. Her voice softened. I wanted to forget what I was made to be. The man's phone vibrated. His face darkened. Rachel already knew. They found me, she whispered. He nodded once. Her phone vibrated too. This time she looked, and the color drained from her face. A single photo filled the screen. A boy, older now, but unmistakable. Rashid, alive, bound, waiting. Rachel inhaled slowly, and something ancient woke fully behind her eyes. He took him, she said. The man swore under his breath. Your creator, he said. He's alive. Rachel closed her eyes. Of course he is. Her voice went quiet. Cold. He always liked watching me run. The bar didn't know what to do with the silence that followed. People stared. Phones lowered. No one recorded anymore. Because this was no longer entertainment. It was history unfolding in front of them. Rachel lifted her head, straightened her spine. The waitress was gone. The ghost had stepped forward, and the room finally understood. They hadn't humiliated a woman. They had woken a weapon that had chosen to become human. And now something she loved had been taken. Which meant she was done being quiet. Why did her face change before anyone else even understood what the message meant? Rachel didn't say the boy's name out loud at first. She didn't have to. The room felt it. Something in her eyes had shifted, not into rage, not into panic, but into a deeper, colder clarity. The kind that comes when a person realizes the past has reached forward and grabbed them by the throat. She looked down at the screen again. Rashid. 16 now, taller, thinner, the same eyes. Alive. Captured. Waiting. Her thumb hovered over the glass, but she didn't zoom in. She already knew what was behind the pixels, the cages, the blindfold, the silence, the hands that would hurt him slowly just to see if she would come. Because they always wanted to see if she would come. The man in the doorway spoke her name again, softer this time. Rachel. She finally looked up. I told him I'd keep him safe, she said. No one answered. Because there are some promises that don't belong to rooms full of people. They belong to souls that have carried too much. They took him, she continued, not because he matters to them, but because I do. Her fingers curled slowly into her palm. Which means they think I'm still theirs. Her phone vibrated again. A new message. Coordinates. The word tomb pulsed at the bottom of the screen like a warning label. No one could peel off. The man beside her inhaled sharply. That place was destroyed. Rachel nodded once. You bombed the shell, she said. The real place was built deeper, 3 levels underground, hardened against nuclear impact. She looked around the bar at the faces, the confusion, the disbelief. I grew up there. The words landed heavy. I learned to read there. I learned to shoot there. I learned how to stop my hands from shaking after killing someone there. Her voice didn't rise. It sank. They didn't make soldiers, she said. They made ghosts. Someone swallowed loudly. They took orphans, she continued. Kids nobody would look for. They cut our names away, replaced them with numbers, taught us that pain meant progress and silence meant survival. She reached up and tugged the collar of her shirt down, just enough to reveal black ink against pale skin. 7 digits. A serial number. I was 7 years old when I became 7. The room didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't blink. They broke us, she said softly, and then they sold us to wars. The man near her spoke again. Called Al-Rashidi, he said. He was your architect. Rachel nodded. The one who taught me how to disappear. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't need to read it. Her voice went quiet. They're giving me 72 hours. A whisper spread through the bar. Rachel lifted her eyes. They'll kill him if I don't come. Her gaze drifted to the men who had mocked her, now pale, shaking, suddenly aware of the cost of misunderstanding a person. I should have stayed dead, she said. No one argued. She turned toward the exit, then stopped, because something unexpected happened. Miller stood. Not fast, not dramatic, but steady. I was wrong, he said. The words seemed to hurt him. We were all wrong. Rachel looked back. Not angry, not forgiving, just tired. If you're going after that kid, he continued, you shouldn't go alone. Carter stood beside him. Then Johnson. Then the rest. Bruised, shaken, humbled. We owe him, Johnson said, and we owe you. Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly. I work alone. Not tonight, a voice from the back said. The man in faded jeans stepped forward again. Ghost 7 died alone, he said. Rachel Torres doesn't have to. Her jaw tightened. They were offering her something more dangerous than backup. They were offering her connection. And connection had once nearly killed her. Her phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't coordinates. It was a voice message. Called. Cultured calm, smiling through sound. Hello 7, I see you're alive. The bar speakers crackled. He had patched himself into their system. You always did enjoy theatrics, but let's not pretend. You know why I have the boy. Rachel closed her eyes. Let him go, she said. Oh, but he's so eager to meet you. He remembers you, talks about you like you're a story that never ended. A pause. A soft child's voice in the background. Rachel, I knew you weren't dead. Her chest tightened. Called, she said quietly. This is between us. It always was, he replied. Come to the tomb, alone, or I kill one child every 5 minutes. The line went dead. Silence slammed into the room. Rachel didn't move. Her face had gone completely blank. The mask of emotion slid away. The ghost stepped forward. I need transport, she said calmly, and equipment untraceable. The man nodded immediately. We can. No, she said. No safe houses, no delay, we go now. Miller stepped closer. We're coming. Rachel met his eyes. You'll die. Maybe, he said, but we won't walk away again. She studied them. Not as soldiers. As humans who had been wrong and were choosing to stand up anyway. Fine, she said, but we do this my way. Her gaze sharpened. No glory, no noise, no heroics. She turned toward the door. We get the children out. And then we disappear. She paused at the threshold, silhouetted against the night. And if any of us don't come back. Her voice softened. Make sure the world never builds places like that again. She stepped into the darkness. And for the first time in years, she wasn't walking alone. Why did she choose the front gate when every instinct in the room told her it was a trap? Rachel didn't look back when the desert wind hit her face. The tomb rose ahead of them like a scar the earth had never healed from, jagged ruins on the surface, clean geometry hidden beneath. Moonlight slid across broken stone. Silence pressed in thick enough to hear her own heartbeat. She walked straight toward the main gate. No shadows. No detours. No disguise. Behind her, the seals moved in disciplined silence, still bruised, still shaken, but no longer careless. They had shed something back in that bar, a kind of arrogance that only grows in places where power isn't questioned. Now they were quiet, and quiet men are dangerous in a different way. Rachel stopped 10 feet from the rusted gate and raised her voice. Called. It carried through the ruins like a challenge written into the air. I'm here. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then the valley lit up. Floodlights snapped on, bleaching stone into bone white. Hidden speakers crackled. Welcome home, 7. The voice was calm, cultured, almost affectionate. You brought friends. You always did have trouble letting go of attachments. They're here for the children, Rachel replied, not for you. A soft laugh rolled through the ruins. Everything here is for me. Metal groaned. The gate creaked open. The path beyond glowed faintly, too perfect, too open. A trap so obvious it felt like a dare. Distraction team, Rachel murmured without turning. You do exactly what you do best. Miller inhaled. Make noise. She nodded. And don't die. The gate slid fully open. The world changed when she stepped through it. Her boots touched stone that still remembered blood. She didn't slow. Didn't hesitate. Her palm slid over a hidden scanner. The door recognized her. That hurt more than it should have. Inside, the air was sterile and cold, nothing like the ruins above. White corridors stretched in repeating geometry. Every surface hummed with buried electricity. Every turn whispered memory. Her childhood had happened here. Not birthdays. Not lullabies. But drills. Pain. Silence. She moved through the halls like a ghost, returning to its grave. Behind her, the world exploded. Gunfire cracked through stone. Explosions thundered. Shouts echoed. The distraction had begun. And she slipped deeper into the maze. She found the first group of children in a room that once taught her how to hold a rifle. 20 small bodies huddled together. Eyes too old. Hands too still. She crouched slowly. I'm here to take you home. A boy looked up suspicious. How do we know you're not another test? Rachel pulled her sleeve up. 7 digits. A scar beneath it. I survived the tests, she said, and now I make sure you don't have to. They followed. They always do when they see the truth in your eyes. She guided them through a maintenance corridor that smelled like dust and metal. Old mining tunnels waited beyond. Forgotten exits called, never thought she'd remember. Don't stop, she whispered. Don't look back. They ran. 20 futures reclaimed. She turned back in. Deeper. The second group was older teenagers. Their eyes held calculation. Their silence was weaponized. She spoke to them in the coded language called used. Their shoulders loosened. They followed. Another 23. Another corridor. Another promise kept. Gunfire echoed closer now. She could hear Miller's voice barking orders. They were holding. They were paying for her time. Rachel moved faster. Her steps didn't echo. Her breathing didn't change. She reached the heart of the tomb, Cald's laboratory. Rashid hung in the center of the room. Chains. Bruised wrists. Tired eyes. He looked up and smiled through fear. I knew you'd come. Her chest tightened. She stepped forward. And then Cald stepped into view. Older. Sharper. Still smiling. "You came home," he said softly. She didn't answer. His gun glinted under white light. "Still predictable," he added. Rachel moved to Rashid's chains. Biometric locks. She bypassed them without slowing. He reached for her. She cut him free. Khald raised his weapon. "Stop." She didn't. The wall exploded. 6 SEALs poured into the room like thunder, breaking through silence. Weapons trained. Breaths controlled. The old predator blinked. Miller spoke once. "We got the kids." Rachel nodded. "That was your mission." "And yours?" Carter asked. Rachel looked at Khald. "To end this." He laughed. "You can't, I have a dead man switch." William stepped forward. "Not anymore." He held up a jammer. Silence fell like judgment. Khald's smile cracked. "You were perfect," he whispered to Rachel. "I was never yours," she replied, "not even when I was 7. They cuffed him." Rashid ran into her arms. She held him tightly. Not as Ghost 7. As Rachel. The tomb burned behind them. The sky began to lighten. And for the first time in her life, she walked out of hell with someone waiting for her on the other side. Why did the sunrise feel heavier than the war she had just walked out of? The helicopters lifted slowly, their rotors carving the cold desert air into long, trembling ribbons. Fire bloomed in the valley below as delayed charges folded the tomb inward, layer by layer, sealing a history that should never have existed. From the open side door, Rachel watched the ruins collapse into themselves. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like a door closing on a childhood she had never been allowed to open, and on a language of pain she had finally decided to stop speaking. Rashid sat across from her, wrapped in a thermal blanket that was 2 sizes too big. His hands shook as he sipped water, the cup rattling lightly against his teeth. Every few seconds his eyes found her again, as if he needed to confirm she was still real. Rachel met his gaze each time and gave him the same small nod. "I'm here. You're safe. Keep breathing." The men who had followed her out of the bar were quieter now. Bruises were blooming across their faces and hands. Their movements were careful, like people who had just learned the shape of their own mortality. No one tried to speak over the rotors. No one joked. The old noise had been burned away. When they touched down at the temporary airstrip, medical teams moved with professional urgency. Blankets were placed around small shoulders. Names were asked for gently. Bottles of water appeared in careful hands. The children were shepherded toward a waiting transport that would take them to a place with beds and windows and people trained to help nightmares loosen their grip. Rashid paused before boarding. He stepped back toward Rachel and hugged her around the waist, his forehead pressing into her ribs the way a much younger child would. His voice was muffled through the fabric of her shirt. "You kept your promise." She swallowed, "So did you." He smiled at that, then let himself be guided away. Rachel stood alone for a moment after the last child boarded. The wind tugged at loose strands of her hair. Her shoulders eased down from their habitual brace. She was suddenly aware of the ache in her hands, the dull soreness in her neck, the faint ringing in her ears that came after long hours of listening for danger. It was the kind of inventory she had taken 1,000 times before. Only now, the list ended with a quiet thought she wasn't used to allowing. "I'm still here." The men approached her without ceremony. Miller stopped a few feet away and cleared his throat, then stopped trying to fill the air. We're sorry," he said finally. "Not just for tonight, for the way we forgot what we're supposed to be." Rachel studied him, then the others. They stood straighter under her gaze, not in fear, but in recognition. "Teach that," she said, "to whoever listens." They nodded. A senior officer approached, his tone careful. "Officially," he said, "Ghost 7 remains deceased." Rachel inclined her head. "Good." And Rachel Torres. She thought about the bar, the sticky counters, the late-night quiet, the smell of coffee and old wood. She thought about the rhythm of wiping tables, the way simple work could make space in her chest for breathing. She's a waitress. He didn't argue. The flight back was quieter than the flight out. The children were already on their way to new rooms and clean sheets. Cald was secured elsewhere, a problem for rooms that had never learned to forgive. The men slept in uneasy half-dozes, heads tipped back, mouths slack, bodies finally allowing fatigue to take its place. Rachel didn't sleep. She watched the sky turn from indigo to pale blue through the small window and let the day write itself across her retinas. She tried to remember the first time she had seen a sunrise that wasn't tied to an extraction window. She couldn't, so she simply watched this one and let it be new. 24 hours later, she stood behind the bar again. It was busier than usual. Word had traveled, though no one could agree on the shape of the story. The stools were filled with laughter that was more careful than it had been. The air felt a little more aware. People tipped more. They said please more often. Some of them looked at her longer than they needed to, as if searching for something they couldn't name. The men took their seats at the same table where it had begun. Their beers remained untouched until she arrived. Miller stood. "We wanted to apologize properly," he said. "Not because of who you are, because of what we did." Rachel nodded once. Apology accepted. Carter leaned forward. "We've started something, training, talking to the younger ones about restraint, about responsibility." "Good," Rachel said. She lifted her tray. "Now what can I get you?" "Just coffee," Brooks said, and smiled like he was trying out a better version of himself. Later, as the night thinned and the floor was wiped down to familiar shine, 3 older men took a corner table. They ordered beers, left generous tips, and spoke softly about weather and travel and baseball scores. They did not mention Aleppo or Damascus or tombs buried under broken stone. Some stories are truer when they are allowed to rest. The footage from that first night never resurfaced. Phones glitched when people tried to replay it. Files corrupted. The story became a rumor that refused to be pinned down. Ghost 7 stayed dead. Rachel Torres stayed. She closed the bar late, moving through her routine with the ease of muscle memory repurposed for gentler work. When she found an envelope tucked beneath a napkin holder, she paused. Inside was a photo. Rashid and the other children standing in front of a school, holding books, their faces bright with a kind of light that doesn't ask permission. On the back in careful handwriting, "We remember, we survive, we choose." Rachel stood alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of cleaner in the air. She traced the edge of the photo with her thumb. Her breathing slowed into something unguarded. She slipped the picture into her pocket and finished wiping down the last table. Outside, the night settled into itself. Somewhere, children were sleeping without being counted. Somewhere, a building burned down to the bedrock of its lies. Somewhere, a woman who had once been taught to be a weapon chose again to be ordinary. Because sometimes strength is quiet. Sometimes resilience is gentle. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.